pretty clear we're now in the era of AI-generated web apps. It's like you can't avoid them nowadays. Just scroll Twitter and you'll see 10 things somebody built in a day using Cursor, V0, or whatever else. But mobile apps have been a little more elusive. Turns out AI generating a mobile app is hard, not just because the code is hard to write or because you need a Mac, but because the whole process of actually getting, building, figuring out the APIs, distributing, and all the other pieces necessary for mobile app generation is quite a bit harder. I know I've experienced this myself trying to build mobile apps, and there's a good chance you have too. But today, things are actually, finally, meaningfully starting to change. Bolt.new just dropped support for mobile apps, and this has a chance of fundamentally changing the game for who can make an app. Most of my life, it has been nearly impossible to build a mobile app without a ton of experience, tools, and all the right pieces necessary to get it shipped to the App Store. That might finally change. And I'm really excited to talk all about it, why it was so hard to build, what we can do with it, and maybe even build an app myself. Before we can do that, a quick word from today's sponsor. Nowadays, it's pretty easy to set up a React app. You just run create next app or create T3 app, and you're probably good to go. If only React Native were so easy. Sure, tools like Expo make it better than ever to actually get things going, but the whole process of building a great mobile app is not as easy as building something in the web. And if you have a bunch of web developers that want to contribute to your mobile app, that's not just a thing you can do. If anything, it's a liability. At least it is without a little bit of help. That's why today's sponsor, Infinite Red, is here to help you out. If you're trying to make a great mobile app with a small number of web devs or even a big number of mobile engineers, they're here to help. They are the industry-leading experts in React Native. They'll do everything from spin up your app to debugging weird edge cases to onboarding a large team. They give workshops to 70 plus people without any issue. They just did a huge one out here in San Francisco. And it's not like they're just helping these small, tiny startups. They will, but they also help some slightly bigger companies you might have heard of, like, Amazon or Zoom or Starbucks. Not the biggest companies, sure, but you get the idea. If you want to do React Native right, if you want to get your team going or get help from an external team that can do most of the hard parts, these are the guys you should talk to. I know that because Jamin, the CTO, is a good friend of mine, and they are the guys I'll be working with when we inevitably, eventually, hopefully, get to a T3 chat app. I love these guys. And I'm not just saying that because they pay me. I'm saying it because there's nobody I trust more than them when it comes to the React Native world. If you're trying to do this stuff right, talk to them. Check them out today at soydev.link/infinitered and make sure to tell them that Theo sent you. Let's dive in. Prompt from idea to App Store. Let's give it a shot. I want to give both a fair chance. So instead of doing this in a Firefox-based browser, we're going to do it in one that's not so Firefox. Oh, that's cool. Build a mobile app with Expo. If I click that, will it just fill that? Cool. Build a mobile app. What should we build, chat? What should we build? I need some help, guys. T3 chat mobile app. T3 chat seems like a pretty clear. Let's try an AI generate a T3 chat app. It should use the Vercel AI SDK, talk to OpenAI's APIs. Also cool things they have here, the connect to Supabase and deploy buttons, very powerful. I should disclose before we get too far, Bolt has sponsored videos in the past, like little ad blurbs in them. They didn't even tell me this was coming. This is not sponsored at all. I just am actually really interested in the idea of AI app gen. And obviously, I'm really close with the Expo guys. I love them. So account for those biases, but know that I'm genuinely trying to see what this can and cannot do. Looks like they're going all in on Expo Router, which is cool to see. I will say things like Expo Router make this one-shotting of an app significantly easier than it would have been in the past. Okay, now we're cooking. So many thoughts already. Cool. We're gonna have to do a long chat about what makes building mobile apps so hard. But first, I want to see this one working. So it's asking me to preview it on my own mobile device. If you're not familiar, one of the cool things about Expo is that React Native layer tells the native layer what to do. So let's try it. The way you test it on your phone, if you don't have Xcode all set up to build the custom app for you, is you can use the Expo Go app, which I'm installing right now. Actually, I think I already have it. I should. Yeah, I already do. So you just grab the Expo Go app from the App Store. You don't even need to open it, I think. Yeah, use the camera scanner app on iOS. So I can just open up my camera, scan, hit open in Expo, allow, because it needs to have local network access. Unable to resolve module AI/React. It seems to have hallucinated a little bit, asking us for an API key. I'll deal with that later. but it has hallucinated on the client side. This, where was it? Is it already, yeah, unable to resolve AI/React and app tabs index. Yeah, use chat is apparently AI/React. I don't think that is a thing. AI SDK. As per always, AI stuff doesn't keep you from having to do a little bit of research yourself. Okay, use chat. It's at AI SDK/React. That's what it got wrong. Back over. There is no AI React package. Use AI SDK/React. Also looks like it's calling out native wind here, which is interesting. If you're not familiar, native wind is an attempt to make Tailwind work on mobile. See if going here again will work. Looking better. Fingers crossed. It's bundling. Come on, it's so close. It is insane that they got all of this working in the browser. Entry. Holy shit, it worked. We're in. That's actually so cool. That's nuts. I still wish I could scale this to a different resolution, but this is my actual phone being mirrored with an actual AI chat mobile app. That's nuts. It's not going to work because I don't have an AI key yet. It's not going to work because it's broken in a bunch of ways. But holy shit, I didn't even know if it would get this far. Let's take a look. Obviously, this is not usable just yet. Honestly, let's pretend we don't know how to code. We'll tell it that we got an error. When I type, I get an error. Cannot read property value of undefined. See if it will fix that. Somebody asked about the 9 errors being shown already. Can't perform a React state update on a component that isn't mounted yet. Change handle submit to handle submit content input. No connected source? No. Okay, it appears the problem was that the project had crashed. I have uncrashed it. So we're getting an error, unexpected comma in that try data function. Let's look for that. Does it show which file? HMR server, that's not something we can really fix. You know what? I'm going to re-roll. Build a mobile app with Expo. It should be a basic AI chatbot app. See how it does the second roll. I have to hide the QR code. Are people using it? That's actually a possibility. I will go out of my way to hide it this time. Still generating, still using the Expo router, putting things in different places, hiding so I can get the QR code without y'all seeing it. Now, we're in. Look at that. Looks suspiciously similar with the chat and settings buttons. There's no, the send is there, it's just not visible. Look at that though, it's actually working. First try, right? Nah, third try, but still. It seems like it was struggling with the AI SDK. When I didn't tell it to use that, I just did whatever. It went and built it, and it even included mock AI responses, so we can actually see it all working. That is super cool though, because like getting something like this started properly is not the easiest thing in the world, especially if you don't know like the basics of Expo, React Native, and how to manage your routing. And this isn't just an iPhone app. This would work on Android as well. You just compile it out for both. But what I'm really curious about is this deploy button here, because now there's a deployed app store option. Before we click that, though, we need to take some time to discuss why it's so important and also why it is so painful. I know a lot of y'all have spent your time doing web dev stuff. I know that's been the case for me, and I'm positive it's the case for a lot of the people who hang out here. Mobile apps are hard for reasons that are honestly a little crazy to comprehend for us web-focused developers. The problem with mobile apps is manyfold. Part one is that you are fully reliant on the platform the app is built for. Something that we do a lot of in the web is effectively reinvent the platform. Like if the web doesn't do a thing we need it to, we can build our own things instead. Stuff like, WebAssembly, letting us put our Python code, our Go code, whatever in the browser. Things like Canvas, letting us build our own engines in the browser. Mobile, for the most part, really tries to push you towards the platform itself and the things built into it. That comes with another fun catch, which is you need to keep the platform happy or risk losing everything. I know a lot of people like to think the problem with app stores is an Apple problem. I totally agree that Apple is egregiously screwing all of this up, but I don't agree it is just Apple. In fact, Google is often worse. Their bans make less sense, and when they do ban or restrict an update to your app, they give way less information and will often just do things wrong and not clarify. Like trying your hardest to ship on the Android store can be obnoxious. And I'm so thankful Epic won their court case in the Android marketplace is being forced to open up a little bit. I just wish it happened to Apple too. I hate how both of these companies run their app stores. The fact that to deploy an app to the iPhone store, you basically need to own a Mac is hilarious. But the biggest problem for the AI is none of this. The biggest problem is the ratio of publicly available code to accessible APIs. This is a complex thing, and I'm going to do my best to break down what I mean by this. On the web, we obviously have a ton of different solutions for building. Let's call this style solutions. Within here, we have a ton of different shit. We might have vanilla CSS, we have Bootstrap, Tailwind, CSS, and JS. You get the idea. We have all sorts of different style solutions for the web. You would think this would confuse the AI because there are so many options, like it's just going to randomly rotate between them. The important detail is that each and every one of these options has an absurd amount of reference material. So this is source code using Tailwind. Source using CSS in JS, etc. So the size of the number of options is not as important as you might think. What matters much more is the amount of reference material these options have. And in the case of the web, most of the options you would reasonably pick have a ton of reference, especially when you consider the current industry stack, the one that everyone loves to shill, myself included, of React, Next, Tailwind, TypeScript. This stack has so much reference material on the internet. Think about all the tutorials I've done that people have copied that are open source. Think about the giant code bases that have been using Cursor and other tools accidentally or even intentionally submitting all their source code. Think about all the examples that all the DevRels at all the different companies have built. The sheer volume of examples for these technologies is so high that it is very easy for AI to generate these things. So why am I talking about style solutions for web in a video about mobile apps? Well, let's talk about mobile, routing solutions. There are a lot of options for routing on iOS and Android, especially once you get into React Native. I'm even just going to limit this to React Native for now. So mobile, we had for React Native, React Navigation, React Native Navigation, and now we also have Expo router. So we have all these different options. The catch is how much reference do we have for any one of these? The amount of open source code available that's using React Navigation, probably pretty small. I haven't seen too much of it. React Native Navigation, going to be a similar deal, just not much reference material. In poor Expo router, having just dropped, there's been a lot of work to make there be more, but since it's still so new, there's even less. So the problem here is that the number of options on mobile isn't meaningfully less than the number of options on web, and the amount of reference material for any one of these options is really low as well. So we need a way to fix this. How can we fix this? We can fix it by doing something a lot of mobile devs probably aren't going to like. We can take these options and make them look a lot more similar to existing options with the tools that we already use. There's been a lot of effort by a lot of style solutions to try and capture what Tailwind does well. This includes things like Uno CSS, Windy CSS, which I think is dead now, Panda CSS, and so many more. These are all cool solutions that have their own benefits and negatives, but if we looked for reference material for any one of these, there just isn't going to be too much. And this sucks without AI, just because if you're trying to solve a problem in Uno, you're not going to have many references and examples to use. But if you're using Tailwind, there's a nearly infinite number of those examples all over the web. But if Uno, Windy, and Panda all support Tailwind style syntax, there's a good chance the solutions that you have from Tailwind world will work in these. And we've seen a lot of architecture moving in this direction. Another kind of crazy example is React Compiler. I have a video coming soon, it might already be out even, about how React's the last framework. And this is what I mean. The syntax of React is so common now that there's just so much stuff that supports it. Part of that's because it looks so much like HTML, but most of it's because it got a certain level of traction and 1. The sheer amount of example material that now exists for using React is absurd. And this kind of corners them because the React team doesn't really have as much an opportunity now to change the syntax of React. Like, let's say, just theoretically, crazy thought, they realized that having props equals like this is actually bad, and it should be done just by dropping it in line like this. That's a change they can't really make because there's not enough data for the AI that's going to be writing so much of our apps to know about this. Sure, you can put in the system prompt like, yeah, use this different new syntax, but the reference material just isn't there and it will not perform as well as a result. So how do we fix that problem? React Compiler fixed it by basically promising that we'll never have to change the syntax again. Compiler will take anything like that, like let's use that theoretical where props inline without having the object breakout is better. The compiler will change the code for us, and the compiler will do whatever the most optimal thing is for us instead, which means that we don't have to change our syntax. More importantly, our AI doesn't have to learn anything new, and the apps we get as a result are just better. I know the creator of StyleX, Naman, is actually working on something similar for Tailwind, where Tailwind code can be compiled through StyleX to have a more performant CSS and JSE solution that works well in React and React Native without having to leave behind your beloved Tailwind syntax. Super, super cool. In one sense, this is kind of how AI might hold us back. It's unlikely that we'll have a meaningful improvement in the actual tools that we're using, like the code and the languages and the syntax. A syntax change is much harder to justify now than it ever has been in the history of software dev. But again, how does this all react to mobile? Well, if we look here, we agree there are a ton of great examples of React, Next, Tailwind, and TypeScript. But React Native, less so. So there aren't as many React Native open source projects. There isn't really, or wasn't until recently, a good Next equivalent, like React Navigation, for example, just isn't as much. Tailwind wasn't really an option. There was RN Style Sheet. Ugh. And God, if you were paying too much attention to Facebook, you might have ended up on Flow for those mobile apps. Or even if you're not React Native, let's say you're Swift. I don't know what the Swift navigation stuff looks like, so I'll leave that blank for now. We're using Swift UI. Even here, Swift UI has changed so much between major versions and randomly deprecated important things and vice versa. And Swift UI is still not being used in even the majority, I believe, of Swift apps. So you might randomly end up on, what's the name of the old UI thing? It's like Core something. I always forget because I got in during the early days of Swift UI. Oh, UIKit. Thank you, chat. Yeah. So there just isn't going to be as much reference material for the happy path on iOS, both because most of the code that works well for these things isn't open source, and there just isn't a culture of sharing these open source examples everywhere. And also because the amount of change in any given Swift UI version means that the code that you might have AI trained from 3 years ago barely even works today. I know that's been my experience with Swift UI. Is every time I try to open an old Swift UI project, after I've dealt with updating Xcode, I get a bunch of errors because things I was using in the past have changed or just don't exist anymore. I don't know how anyone complains about maintainability of a React code base when I basically can't ever upgrade my Swift apps, but to each their own. The main point I'm trying to make here is that there isn't enough material for training relative to the amount of things, and more importantly, the amount of change that exists within any one of these things. So how do we solve this? Well, as I was saying before, we know this is a kind of golden stack. We have these things, and it turns out AI is pretty good at generating them. You can argue all day about whether or not this tech is good. I don't care. You can't really argue that the AI is pretty good at generating these things. I've talked to a lot of people who are fanboys of other solutions that agree AI generation with the React, Next, Tailwind, TypeScript stack is in a pretty good spot overall. So how do we solve this problem? What if we tried to make a mobile stack that was so similar that the differences didn't matter as much anymore? So we go from React to React Native, duh. Next is a bit more challenging because if you look at something like React Navigation, it's super mobile specific because mobile navigation is very different. That's a video I've been meaning to do for a while. The concept of a stack is very different from the concept of history. Doing a good router for mobile is challenging, especially if you want to take full advantage of all the things you can do on mobile. So you have here the stack navigation as well as the native stack router that you can create these two different stacks, and you render a navigation stack router using the native stack navigator. It's not at all like the things you're probably used to writing as a React dev. It's not here to say it's good or bad. I actually think this was critical for me to better understand the differences between mobile dev and web dev. What I am absolutely saying is this is nothing like the routers that we're using for web dev, which results in the code that we could theoretically generate just not being as good. So Expo's inadvertently solved this. Expo router is much more similar to something like Next or Remix than it is to something like, I don't know, React Navigation. So now a lot of the data for how Next works is suddenly a lot more useful when you're trying to get Expo router code to come out. This also has a really useful side benefit of how you handle your backend. A harsh reality I learned a while back is if we had a spectrum from like, I don't know, server infra dev on one side, and you have a JS pilled soy boy on the other side, this spectrum is a thing a lot of devs would fit somewhere between. I'd say I'm somewhere like right in the middle where I do a lot of backendy stuff, even if you guys don't like to admit it. Y'all probably think I'm here. I'm probably in between the two here-ish. But the important thing to note here is the place you are in dictates how comfortable you are working with either side. So if you're here, then you might be slightly more comfortable leaning into the JS side than you are on the server side. But if you're talking about, I don't know, like assembly code in FFmpeg, this is so far off that the thought of reaching out to there is terrifying for people a little further to the right on the spectrum. Where do mobile devs go on this spectrum? Tell me, chat. Where would a mobile dev go on this spectrum? Third dimension. Interesting theory. Beyond the infra, max soy dev. They hate both sides, they don't admit it. Not quite wrong. The harsh reality I've experienced is that my guess was wrong. If the average Next.js dev is here, so we'll call this average Next.js dev. The average Next dev is here. My assumption would have been that the average mobile dev would have been like somewhere a little further to the side, like here. This would have been my guess. My guess was entirely wrong, though. After I started talking more with mobile devs and trying to build things like Upload Thing to better support the mobile use case, and also, of course, talking a lot about server components, the painful realization I had, mobile devs are further to the right than us JS-pilled soy boys. They are petrified of servers. If you ask a mobile dev to build a server, they're going to look at you like you're an alien. If you ask them to serve an endpoint with JSON, they're going to break out into a cold sweat. The reason something as horrifyingly bad as Firebase can exist is because of mobile devs not wanting to touch things that far along the road. That sucks. As such, most mobile tools, even React Native, have intentionally steered away from servers. They went out of their way to not do server-side things and just let you go deal with Firebase and build a bunch of insecure bullshit yourself. Expo Router said, screw that. Expo Router actually introduced API endpoints. Now they're introducing server rendering. I have a whole video about the cool things going on with server components in Expo Router. Expo Router also lets you export to the web. It's starting to get all the pieces you need to build an app. Because when you're building an app, you're not just building a fancy UI. You also need to build something that it connects to almost always. There are very few apps worth using that don't have a server of some form backing them. But if you ask an AI to build an app and you don't know about any of those things, you don't know you need a server. And if the AI has to build the server separate from the client, the more things that are that separate and, more importantly, exist in different files or worse, different code bases, the worse the AI is at trying to mangle that whole story. Expo Router lets you have a backend file directly next to a frontend file in a syntax that's similar enough to Next's that it can mostly just work. And the best way to see this is go try building an Expo Router project if you're a Next dev. You'll be surprised how many of the things you're already familiar with will carry over. So what about the rest here? We got Tailwind. Obviously, we can't Tailwind on mobile, can we? Native Wind is a really, really cool project. Native Wind is actually built by a dev that now works at Expo. And the goal of Native Wind is to make it way easier to effectively write Tailwind inside of your components for React Native. Problem solved, right? Well, there's a lot of catches, sadly, to the world of Native Wind. It's still really, really cool, and I certainly would use it if I was building a mobile app right now. I have to build a mobile app soon, don't I? Anyways, Native Wind is really, really cool, and I definitely would try and use it in places where it makes sense to. As such, problem kind of solved. We now have something that is syntactically nearly identical to Tailwind, so all that training material is still good too. In TypeScript, no one uses Flow anymore. We're all in on TypeScript still. TypeScript has an additional really nice benefit of it gives errors, and those errors can be used by the AI to do a better job of fixing the problems that you might have. Fuck yeah. All solved, right? Now we have a toolkit that is so similar to this popular web stack that we have much more reference material that might not be perfect material, but it's close enough that we can maybe get a little bit further. And it seems like that's the case. If we look at the code that was generated here, it's going to look a lot like if I had built the same thing in web. You know what? Let's test that. I'm actually curious. Build a web app with Next.js. Should be a basic AI chatbot app. Let's see how similar the output code looks, because I have a suspicion here. So this is the React Native version. Oh, look at that. They even have like an in-browser preview thing. That's really, really useful, actually. So the mock AI responses, chat screen, input, set input, messages, add message, flat list. This is the most React Native-y part. Flat list is chaos. We hop over here. Input, set input, messages, set messages, is loading, set is loading. Handle submit. This one has the simulation for the AI response. If we look at the actual markup here, oh, it's pretty smart here. It's pulling in keyboard avoiding view, flat list, view. Did it not use native wind for this one? Interesting. I assumed it would just always use native wind. Does it even have the package for it? It doesn't. Fascinating. They might have put more effort in here than I thought. This is actually really cool and very interesting to see. Let's compare the routing, see if that's a little more similar. Looks like the routing here is super minimal. We have the layout, the root, page, and then globals. And it went a little further with the routing here, where it also made a settings page as an example with a handle clear chat button. This is trained on some different stuff by the looks of all this. It's different enough. Let's see how the chat store was handled on this side, if it even was. It's not. It's just messages, set messages. Interesting. I would have expected more overlap in these two than we're seeing. Fascinating. Use native wind instead. Terminal error. What are our problems? Dot plugins is not. Good old Metro errors. Let's let it try and fix. Appears we got this into a pretty broken state. We'll roll back. Yeah. RIP. Worth a shot. It's funny how similar this is to my actual experience building on mobile. It always breaks in the most egregious, nonsensical ways. That's erroring like mad. Hopefully a reset will fix that. Cool. There we go. Did somebody on Android scan that code? Freaking nerds. It is pretty cool that you can do that, though. That, like, I can be working on an app here and give the code to someone on my team to go quickly try it. That's one of the things I'm most excited about here is the idea of getting to play with an app before it's done. Apple's historically been really, really nasty about what they do and don't allow on the App Store. Funny enough, Expo largely exists because they had been trying to build a better mobile browser that lets you do more app-like things, and Apple just would ban them. So instead, they try to make it easier to build apps because they couldn't build a platform for new types of apps. They instead built an easier way to build them in the first place. Due to all of the legal issues that Apple's been running into around how they run the App Store, it seems like they've been a little bit more tolerant of people experimenting on the fringes of what should or shouldn't be allowed for an app that lets you do other app stuff. It's cool to see this all coming together now. But here I have my React Native app in the browser. If you didn't already know, React Native isn't just for native platforms like iOS and Android. You can run it on consoles as well. But more importantly, React Native works for web. Fun fact, React Native for web was originally built for Twitter. Twitter doesn't use React Native on iOS or Android, but they do use React Native for the website to this day. We've been playing around a lot. It's fragile. I won't pretend otherwise. Mobile ecosystem always is, especially when you're running a mobile app building toolkit like this in the browser. But I want to hit the last scary button. Deploy to App Store. I have no idea what this is going to entail. We'll go on this ride together. Submitting to App Store. EAS Submit. It's a hosted service. Oh, is it just EAS Submit? I already know EAS Submit. If you're not already familiar with what it takes to deploy something to the App Store, you need to pay Apple's $100 a year fee in order to have an official Apple developer account. You have to make a native app binary signed for the App Store submission that gets submitted to Apple with all the instructions and metadata that they require, especially for permission stuff. Like if you need camera permission, you need to have a descriptive reason you use the camera in your app before Apple will even look at the app. They'll just throw it out and say, describe this better. Once you've done all that, you can submit the binary to Apple to see if they'll approve it or not. Not fun to sign it and do all of that stuff. I've fought Xcode so many times trying to get an app to sign properly. Expo made this a lot easier where you can just run the EAS submit command and it will do most of these steps for you. If it doesn't have the right Apple keys, it'll give you the link to go deal with it. Does all those parts. Annoying, but it works. Is a hell of a lot better than the alternatives. I'll be real, I don't think I could deploy an app right now without using Expo, just because it's so many steps that it's hellish. I was thinking they had a deploy to App Store button. I'm curious, can I run EAS submit here? Error, could not determine an executable to run. That makes sense. The way Bolt and StackBlitz prior work is that this isn't running on a server that they have that we're SSHing into effectively. Bolt is running in my browser as a web container. So they have an actual like mini Node-esque thing running in my browser in that Node VM effectively that is technically based on web standard V8 lets me run a lot of things in the browser without needing an external separate server. But that means it's not Windows or Mac or Linux. It's this weird fourth thing. Because this isn't a real traditional platform, there are certain things that expect a native platform like ESBuild, the Golang alternative to compiling your TypeScript and JavaScript code and bundling it. ESBuild is written in Go. It needs a native binary. Thankfully, ESBuild has a WASM-compatible binary that you could use for things like this. If you're using Vite in the browser, it's going to use the ESBuild WASM binary. But EAS submit, that's going to be harder. Expo building all the necessary integrations to bundle, compile, and submit an app for review. There's no way they're getting that all working in the web. But now it all makes a lot more sense. You can still deploy to web because, again, React Native for web is a thing. But the App Store deployment's still your problem. It has gotten a lot easier where you can do the whole thing in 15 minutes if you follow this video, which is genuinely dope and cool to see. But it's still hands-on. So it feels like we've solved a lot of the problems here. There's like a spectrum of from idea to shipped. And on web, this spectrum is relatively short. Like the amount of effort it takes to go from an idea for a web app to shipping it, relatively small. The amount of effort for mobile is significantly larger with significantly more painful stopgaps. If we have a line here that's like, it works on my machine, that line occurs pretty close to the shipping line for web. That line occurs a lot later overall on mobile, but a lot earlier in terms of you're ready to go. I can't tell you how many times I had an app that works totally fine on my phone or my iPad that I then have to go through 15 more steps of it builds a binary finally to my Apple dev account was approved to my app is submitted for review to I passed all the reviews to finally you can ship. And there are just so many more of these steps that it's, how do I put this? This whole spectrum here from idea to shipped has been largely figured out with AI. Tools like Bolt.new, V0, Lovable, all of those are now at the point where you can go from idea to shipped with very little experience pretty easily. Will the thing you build be great? Will it work really reliably? Will it handle a lot of traffic? Hard to know. But you can do this whole process relatively quickly now with AI. This is the important part I want to really emphasize. So if this box is the effort it takes, just getting it built is more effort on mobile than shipping the whole thing is on web, which sucks in so many regards. Because if you're the creators of Bolt or Expo, you will put years of work to optimize this box to make this better. And you'll get less attention for it and have affected the whole spectrum less on it than if a web dev fixes this part, or even if they just fix this part from when it works on your machine to shipped. This is significantly less effort than what it took to make Bolt work with Expo. But this looks more appealing. And the fact that it takes this much effort just to get that far sucks. The fact that all of the rest of these steps takes even longer, ugh. Especially if we're a little more realistic here, where the amount of space between my app is submitted for review and I passed all the reviews is comparable to the entire idea to shipped pipeline for web. Like these gut feel from my experience are roughly the same length. So yeah, I was hopeful that the Bolt Expo stuff would go a little further, maybe get to here for me. But I understand why it can't. That's so much chaotic additional work to do. So this part's like what Bolt and Expo Router are helping with. This part here This is what EAS build helps with. The dev account approved thing isn't too bad, so I'll move that there. We'll say this is like just good docs. We don't even care about that part, whatever. Just do it. This part, not really worth optimizing. Getting your app submitted for reviews, annoying, but not too bad. This, I'll say EAS submit is really good for. Draw my arrow. EAS submit helps here. And then this last part. Oh man, this last part. In the wonderful words of Apple and conferences, only thing that's going to help you here is courage. Yeah, this is the problem. I dream of a world where shipping mobile apps is as easy as shipping web apps. And as exciting as it is to have this part, and now even this part too, more and more solved, the rest of the spectrum still sucks. And because of that, it's really hard for someone with an idea to justify starting with a mobile app. If you can start with a web version, it's more and more viable to go in that direction. This is my Next.js AI chat app generated on Bolt. If I want to add a database, I can click connect to Supabase and connect it. Oh, apparently it's not supported with Next. That's funny. And when I'm ready to deploy it, I just click deploy. And now it's going live on Netlify. We are not there for mobile. And unless Apple makes specific changes, it's going to be a long time before we are. Because realistically speaking, pretty much everything here is Apple making it hard, and Google too, to be fair. This part is what makes mobile app development way harder than it needs to be. This part sucks too. There's been a lot of effort to innovate on this side. But this is what makes shipping your first mobile app, maintaining that mobile app, and really succeeding with the release cycle of building software. This is what makes it suck. And realistically speaking, something like T3 Chat that we have slaved over and that we're shipping probably 10 updates a day to, mobile was not built in a way where we can ship at that speed. It is sad to say, but mobile app development and the mobile app platforms are just, they hadn't even caught up to where web dev was 5 years ago yet. Now with the AI stuff, it just feels so laughably behind. And I honestly think whichever app platform, be it iOS or Android, caves and flattens this first is going to see a level of innovation in mobile software that we haven't seen since the iPhone first added the App Store. And I will pose this as a challenge to any people who I know working at Apple and Google. Whoever can squash this first, whoever can go from, like, this is still the equivalent of buying your own servers, going to the warehouse and racking them yourself. Whoever can make the jump from that to Vercel or that to Netlify first to solve this problem, that's the platform that wins. And all of the effort companies like Expo are doing to make this smoother is necessary to ship at all. But if we want to see an exponential curve, exponential growth in the number of mobile apps being built, if we want to see a revolution in the things we can do with applications on our phone, we can't keep hacking around Apple and Google. We need Apple or Google to fundamentally change how this all happens. We need Apple and Google to go back to Steve Jobs' original vision for the iPhone announcement.
We've got an innovative new way to create applications for mobile devices. Really innovative. And it's all based on the fact that iPhone has the full Safari inside it. The full Safari engine is inside of iPhone. And it gives us tremendous capability, more than has ever been in a mobile device to this date. And so you can write amazing Web 2.0 and AJAX apps that look exactly and behave exactly like apps on the iPhone. And these apps can integrate perfectly with iPhone services. They can make a call. They can send an email. They can look up a location on Google Maps. After you write them, you have instant distribution. You don't have to worry about distribution. Just put them on your internet server. And they're really easy to update. Just change the code on your own server rather than having to go through this really complex update process. And they're
I'm sorry. It's so funny hearing this in retrospect because all of the things he is saying make this a good app platform are things they screwed up with the App Store. Each and every one of them.
Secure. With the same kind of security you'd use for transactions with Amazon or a bank. And they run securely on the iPhone so that they don't compromise its reliability or security. And guess what? There's no SDK that you need. You've got everything you need if you know how to write apps using the most modern web standards to write amazing apps for the iPhone today.
Maybe, just maybe, Apple will see the light. Remember the promises Steve Jobs made back when the iPhone was revealed. And perhaps someday we'll actually have an experience deploying apps on mobile that is as good as what he just described, because it seems like Jobs gets it. You shouldn't need to do all of those crazy things and jump through all those hoops just to make a great app for mobile users. And it's just hilarious in retrospect to look at that list and realize how far from the good graces of the original promise Apple has landed. And hopefully this video helps showcase how far we are from what Apple even knows is a good developer experience. All of the things Steve Jobs just listed as what makes developing for iPhone great is not true at this point in time. Yeah. Perhaps in the future, we'll actually be able to deploy our apps on mobile as simply as was just described. But for now, we're still trying to figure out how to build them in the first place. It's kind of crazy that making apps has only gotten harder over the years, despite the fact that making websites has only gotten easier. I hope this was a useful video. What a set of crazy tangents. Let me know what you guys think. And until next time, peace, nerds.